Hi and welcome. This video is part 1 of a series where I will expose the plagiarism of the Quran. Have you noticed the Quran repeatedly insists it's not the product of a poet? Quran chapter 69 verse 41 says, وَمَا هُوَ بِقَوْلِ شَاعِرٍ قَلِيلًا مَا تُؤْمِنُونَ, which means, it is not the word of a poet, little is that you believe. And Quran chapter 36 verse 69 says, وَمَا عَلَّمْنَاهُ الشِّعْرَ وَمَا يَنْبَغِي لَهُ إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا ذِكْرٌ وَقُرْآنٌ مُبِينٌ, which means, and we have not taught him, meaning Muhammad, poetry, nor is it meet for him. This is only a reminder and a plain Quran. But why does the author of the Quran seem so defensive here? Why the repeated defense that the Quran is not poetry? Well, the Quran itself informs us that those who were rejecting Islam in Muhammad's time were accusing him of producing mere poetry. Quran chapter 21 verse 5 quotes them as saying, بَلِ افْتَرَاهُ بَلْ هُوَ شَاعِرٌ, which means, nay, he has invented it, nay, he is a poet. While in Quran chapter 37 verse 36 they said, وَيَقُولُونَ أَإِنَّا لَتَارِكُوا آلِهَاتِهِنَّ لِشَاعِرٍ مَجْنُونَ, which means, are we going to abandon our gods for the sake of a mad poet? And finally, Quran chapter 52 verse 30 records them as saying, أَمْ يَقُولُونَ شَاعِرٌ نَتَرَبَّصُ بِهِ رَيْبَ الْمَنُونَ, which means, or do they say, a poet, referring to Muhammad, of course, we await for him some calamity by time. The majority of people in 7th century Arabia were illiterate, so many just believed Muhammad without being able to investigate his claims. Many submitted to Islam due to fear and intimidation. But others did speak up, and that's what we see reflected here in these allegations against Muhammad in the Quran. So I guess you're wondering, why were these people accusing Muhammad of producing mere poetry? Well, before I answer that, let's first get Muhammad's own personal opinion on the value of poetry. While there are narrations which reveal Muhammad was against the kind of poetry which contained extreme exaggeration, as you see here, the famous Muslim commentator on the Quran, Ibn Kathir, lies to us by claiming Muhammad did not like it and he had no inclination towards it. That is a lie, because we know Muhammad did value the type of poetry which contained wisdom. As we read in Sahih al-Bukhari, volume 8, hadith number 6145, where Muhammad said, Inna min ash-sha'ri hikmah, which means, some poetry contains wisdom. So now that we know Muhammad recognized wisdom in poetry, let's investigate the accusation that he was producing it. Actually, because Muslims believe that Muhammad was illiterate, a better question to ask is, who was Muhammad taking poetry from? While in Persia, modern-day Iran, a Christian missionary named William St. Clair Tisdale came in possession of some Arabic poetry attributed to the famous pre-Islamic poet Imr al-Qais. What was startling about that find was, it appeared to be evidence that Muhammad had plagiarized lines of poetry from Imr al-Qais, because his pre-Islamic poetry was matching what the Quran says. For those who don't know, the best estimates show Imr al-Qais died around the year 565 AD, which is 5 years before Muhammad was born. In Tisdale's book, The Original Sources of the Quran, he displayed a copy of the poetry, and in the appendix to chapter 2 of his book, he explained that the passages of poetry marked with a line above them are also found in the Quran. They are Quran chapter 54 verse 1, verse 29, verse 31, and verse 46. Actually, verse 1 is found twice in this poem. In addition, Tisdale showed other Quran verses which match lines from this pre-Islamic poetry. Here's another picture available online which better displays the corresponding matches between this pre-Islamic poetry and the Quran, so you can verify this yourself. Tisdale had shown word for word exact matches, but said, quote, except that in some of the words there is a slight difference, though the meaning is the same, end quote. And of course, those slight differences make perfect sense for someone trying to hide plagiarism. Tisdale therefore concluded that there is some connection between these lines and the similar verses of the Quran. So this looks pretty damning and convincing, right? Well, Muslims of course deny the charge Muhammad plagiarized from pre-Islamic poetry. So we need to look at the usual Muslim responses to this problem and refute each one. And that's exactly what I'll do in part 2 of this video series. Make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel and click the notification bell so you won't miss my next video. God bless you in Jesus' name, and see you in part 2.